Welcome to the Seder training video. This is meant for you if you are looking to lead a Seder in your home, especially if it's your first time leading a Seder. One of the first things that you will need is a Haggadah, or Haggadot for plural. There are many Haggadot that exist, and there are even quite a few Messianic Haggadot now. This is one that I use and recommend. It is the Messianic Jewish Passover Haggadah, compiled and edited by Elliot Clayman and Michael Schiffman. I've used this for quite a few years now in my home and have really come to enjoy it. I would recommend that you purchase one as well if you would like to use this in your home. They could be obtained at the Baruch HaShem Judaica shop, and they could also be obtained online through the link in the description. Participation. Wanted to just briefly talk about, as the leader, how you approach the Seder. So a few suggestions. And in these videos, I'm not going to read the entirety of the Haggadah, because if you can read, then you're already qualified. You could lead the Seder. You can just read through the book and it takes care of itself. All the instructions are there. But with that said, it even gives instructions regarding who is going to be the reader to tell the story, because that's what Haggadah means, the telling. And then it will say all, sections for everyone to read. And I would highly recommend, to whatever extent you can, to include everyone at the table, including young children. In fact, there's a section called Ma Nishtana that is ideally sung by the youngest that can sing it at the table. And after the meal, there's a time where the afikomen is hidden, the middle matzah is broken and hidden. And of course, there's a great deal of Messianic symbolism in this in regards to Yeshua. But this, in some homes, it will be that the children hide the afikomen. In other homes, you might see that an adult hides the afikomen and then the children go to find it. So I just want to encourage you to get everyone involved that you can. It will make the evening as enjoyable as possible. And I would also say you might want to start early in the evening, because it takes time to work through the Haggadah. And although my grandfather's Seders used to go past midnight, sometimes it's nice if you can eat at a reasonable hour. Searching for the leaven. So one of the first things we do, and this comes actually before Pesach, in the days leading up to Pesach, is we cleanse our homes from leaven. Of course, leaven being a representative of sin, and this is a time of unleavened bread, or matzah. So it is customary to go through your home and remove the old leaven. Now, there are many customs around this. I've heard of it being sold to neighbors. I've heard of the leaven being burned, or even a small portion of it, which is representative of the leaven in the home, being burned. I've heard of cabinets being wrapped and tied off that we don't access, or maybe people putting their leaven into the garage or onto the porch or removing it from the home. You can do as you see fit with the leaven. I think the thing that we share in common is that we don't partake of the leaven during the days of Passover. Approaching the Seder. So perhaps you're thinking, I've never done this before, or I don't have enough Hebrew knowledge, or I don't know the songs. It's okay if you don't know the songs. It's okay if you don't know Hebrew. It's okay if you're not very musical. It's okay if you're not a great reader. But still, I would encourage you to read or have someone at your table who can read. Perhaps it's difficult to read the size of the font. You may need to have someone younger at the table to assist you. You can do it as a team. In fact, each year, people in my family come from different backgrounds. So my mother, she was raised in an Orthodox home. I will call her several times during the Seder and say, hey, Mom, could you sing Haggadah? Because I know she has this beautiful melody that she will bring, and she'll sing the entirety of the song where I only know the chorus. So I want to encourage you, regardless of your background, Really, all this comes down to is picking up a book and reading it out loud with your family. And you can engage it to whatever level you please. Preparing for your Seder. So this is a section that could be as complex as you want it to be. But I want to talk about the basics of preparing for the ceremony of the Seder and some of the materials that you will need and that you will find referenced as you go through the Haggadah. So one, there is a meal associated with the Seder, and it comes, it's past the halfway point. Usually by the time you have the meal, it's kind of downhill from there, and it's a shorter segment at the end of the meal, thankfully, because you're digesting all this food, and perhaps even 4 cups of wine. So although you won't all be doing that, it is certainly part of the tradition. So you would set your table as you would for a meal, including beverage or water glasses, and 1 wine glass per person. Don't feel obligated to use very expensive items if you don't have them. You could use disposable plastic cups if you wanted to. You will need 2 tapered candles to light at the beginning of the Seder. You will need enough grape juice or red wine, and you can choose what you prefer there. Enough for 4 small amounts for each person at your table. And although we refer to the 4 cups, which will be referenced throughout the Seder, typically what is done is you'll take a sip at the different points throughout the meal 4 times. But I suppose if you wanted to drink a whole glass, maybe this is why Yeshua's disciples were so tired and couldn't pray after the Seder. So I think we have some liberty in regard to these things. We have a wine glass that we'll be using during the Seder for the leader, maybe something a little nicer if you have it. We have another glass that is for Elijah. And this is a portion that will come in the Seder where we welcome Elijah, a forerunner of Mashiach. And as a child, this was always my favorite point of the Seder, because either me or my sister would go to the front door and call out for Elijah. And if she was calling out for Elijah, I'd be watching the cup to see if he came and drank a little bit of the glass, if it went down. So it was this very mysterious thing for me as a boy, and I have fond memories of this. We'll also need an extra chair at the table for Elijah. And if we want to go all the way with it, we would have an extra Seder plate set up for Elijah. But don't feel obligated. You can have an extra space at the table and maybe a cup for Elijah. Also, a bowl half filled with fresh water for washing of the hands, which you can have just the leader do, or you can have the whole table do if you wish. So you'll need a hand towel. You'll need a plate for matzah. And it's ideal to have plenty of matzah if you're leading a Seder, enough to go around and to be used with the various elements and the charoset and the maror that we'll get into. So plan at least 2 matzahs per person at the table to eat with dinner, plus a few more just in case. There's also a matzah tash or a matzah cover, and a afikomen pouch for the matzah that will be hidden later. You can use some kind of handkerchief or large napkin for this as well. You can use something fancy. They sell these compartmentalized matzah tashes that you can store the 3 matzot in, or you can have something, just a cloth, that you wrap them in. So don't feel obligated to spend exorbitant funds. Work within your budget to make this happen. We have a bowl half filled with salty water that will represent tears. And then we have the Seder plate. Now you can provide a Seder plate for each person at the table, or if you feel like that's too much, you can have a Seder plate for the entire table that you reference. And I would say, especially in regards to the shank bone, it's probably not necessary for each person at the table to have a shank bone. You only need the one to be representative for the group. But what will be on the Seder plate? You'll have vegetables, bunches of parsley cut into small branches for each guest that will be used during the Seder, bitter herbs such as horseradish, and if I could say, because this is a fun part of the Seder, you may have something more mild, but I would suggest using horseradish that is intense, because it is always fun to have the shared experience around the table of actually crying tears, or the one who's never tried horseradish before or is bold and puts on a little extra in a show of chutzpah and then is left weeping at the table. It just makes for a fun time. So I'd recommend strong horseradish. Also a shank bone, a lamb shank roasted with the meat removed. And these can be found at the butchers or at the supermarkets in the weeks leading up to Pesach. You can ask for one of these, or call your local community or call the office at Baruch HaShem to inquire about how you might find one. A roasted egg for each Seder plate. You may make one for each person to participate, but that is not traditionally done. And then all of these things you can look up online. There are some variations on how different traditions approach. My mother has a potato on her plate. I don't do that tradition. There are Ashkenazi and Sephardic traditions. So you can dig into this to the extent that you wish to dig into it. Charoset, which is an apple mixture. I'm not going to be going into recipes, but I'll just mention things, and then you could look them up, and they'll be referenced in your Haggadah as well. So there is charoset, and there is also maror, which I mentioned with the horseradish. So you'll see those terms used interchangeably. I want to talk briefly about prayers and songs. So you may feel qualified, or you may actually be qualified, to read and sing all of the blessings and the songs that occur throughout the Haggadah, such as Dayenu, Eliyahu Hanavi, the four questions, Chad Gad Yah, or you may feel entirely unqualified to sing these things. So there may be someone at the table. I sing the songs that I know and I'm comfortable with, and then as I mentioned earlier, there are times where I say, I need to call my mom, and I'll warn her ahead of time that I may call her during my Seder, and I'll ask her to sing, and she enjoys it. But if you don't have the benefit of having my mom on speed dial, you can go on YouTube and type Chad Gad Yah and see different versions of how these songs are sung, and all the titles are there in the Haggadah. I'd like to talk about one element that I found in this Haggadah that wasn't necessarily in the Haggadah I used growing up in a traditional Haggadah, in a traditional setting. And one of the additions that I find excellent is, along with the 10 plagues, and we'll be going through, I don't know if it's a custom for everyone to use their pinky and dip onto the dish. That's what I grew up with, and that's what I see. But also, what they've done in this Haggadah is, after listing the 10, they have listed another list of 10 modern plagues. And I find this fascinating, just to make things relevant to our time and for us to be more thoughtful as we look around at society today. Miriam's cup. One of the things I love about this Haggadah, which is not typical, but it has a section on Miriam's cup. This is located on page 24 of the Haggadah. And this is a whole section that honors not only Miriam, but the women at the table, the woman of the home, etc. And I feel like this is a very important part of the Seder, especially because more often than not, it is women doing so much behind the scenes to prepare the meal. And I know I'm leading a Seder and people say, oh, you've done such a great job, and they don't realize the work that Mary in my home, Miriam, has put in, or my wife has put in preparation. And I've helped too, but they've done so much more. And I think it is a good tradition to honor that. In closing, I hope that you feel encouraged to lead a Passover Seder. And I will say that although Passover is observed by Jewish people throughout the world, we have a distinction as Messianic Jews and Gentiles in uniquely lifting up Yeshua through this feast. So much so that I think it is apt that the last thing that you taste in the Seder meal, in fact, the dessert, maybe even after you've had your macaroons or your leaven-free cakes and sweets, the last thing that you partake of, and I believe that this is the onset of communion, what we call communion in the community of faith, but it was done at Pesach, where they broke the middle matzah that represented Yeshua, that was broken and brought back for us to partake of. And that matzah, that middle matzah that represents Yeshua, is the last thing we taste as we go out. And this biblically is the beginning of the year for us. So may it launch us forth being filled and filled up with Yeshua and his love.